Welcome to Adeptus On-Air, the show where we examine how individuals and companies make decisions that drive their business and personal success. Each week, we connect with notable professionals who pull back the curtain on the industries that Adeptus has been on the cutting edge of for the last 30 years, including music, sports, and entertainment, as well as new emerging markets.
Okay, folks, welcome back to Adeptus On-Air. So as the curtain is about to fall on 2023, we thought we would press pause, reflect back on the year that was, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be with three dear friends, colleagues here at Adeptus Partners, particular order, James Walker, Mike Hoffman, and Evan Eneman. I thought a good way for us to start, guys, if we look back at the year, this has sort of been a new initiative. Maybe start with you, James. As you look back at the year, just any thoughts or highlights that come to mind from Adeptus On-Air that are perhaps worth sharing, reflecting in terms of how hopefully we've helped our listeners learn a little bit more about us and educate folks about the different disciplines that we're involved in. So, James, kick it off.
Yeah, Anthony, I think the overall takeaway I would have for this year is just the amount of new things that I've learned, from the different guests, and I think it kind of goes back to what I learned in sports reporting is that everyone has their own unique journey. Even just
Yeah,
the four of us, we all have our own story, our own path, and how we got here, right here to the same place, but also with our guests and different, different things and just the challenges that people face that people don't know about or don't see. I think we were able to really delve into some of those things, particularly with the people that that I spoke to. If
yep,
I want to pull out one example, and I'll pull out more examples as we go, but one example is Fatih Largespada, who is a fencing coach at the
uh-huh,
University of North Carolina, and she's training for the Olympics. She came to this country basically, due to her skill and love of fencing. I got her a college scholarship at Temple
terrific.
University, which is my alma mater. And she's making her way out here in the U.S. Through fencing. It's kind of her life's passion, and she's away from her family and everything. And so just different stories like that, and
Yeah,
things that we may not think about day to day. That given the platform, given the Adeptus On-Air, that we have a good 30, 40, 50 minutes in some cases to really delve into people's stories and really kind of explore the humanistic side of things, because the world is going so fast and
sure.
everybody's doing everything, and especially in the business world, that to be able to kind of sit down for 1 hour and
Yep,
discuss human stories, I think has really been great.
fantastic, James. Talking about alma maters, with the recent PR debacle at Harvard, I noticed this morning Harvard's down to 2,736 in the rankings, which is not bad at all. Mike, maybe if we scoot around to you, thoughts and ideas as we look back on the year, maybe some highlights and things you want to share with our listeners.
Yeah, it was an evolution of sorts. Obviously, this being a whole new area for me, talking to people, and it was interesting because I think the variety of people I spoke to is probably a little bit of a more diverse
Yeah,
list. I think just because of the number of podcasts that I did. I mean, I had a couple of people that are on reality TV, children's
yep,
actors. So I had a bunch in the entertainment, a blind guitarist. So I had a
yep,
lot in the entertainment area, but then I also had some on the business side. Real estate agents, insurance brokers, entertainment and liability insurance brokers. Then just people in the middle, just directors, producers, other kinds of entrepreneurs. So it was really a very interesting mix and blend. Uh, you know, I think my style kind of evolved. My first podcast was with a client of mine who was kind of on reality TV. He's done some, acting since then, and he hosts a
yep,
podcast. So I kind of talked to him before we went live and kind of, hey, you know, thoughts and things like that. And then, we kind of addressed that a little bit in our call. But, what was interesting is, what he told me, and I've learned quickly, is if I'm not enjoying the conversation and it's not fun, that's going to show. So not
Yeah.
only do I have to have a topic that's of interest to me, but I got to make it interesting to other people, and the conversation needs to be interesting. So I get off topic a lot because I just kind of make it like I'm talking to an old friend, for the 45 minutes. And, I'll be talking to someone about business. Then 2 minutes later, we're talking about our favorite sitcoms from the 80s because somehow it shifted that way. And then we'll get back on gear. Then 2 seconds later, we'll be talking about our kids. And
Yeah.
talking to some people that have listened to it, at least they find it to be somewhat, a little, while educational and beneficial in that regard, just also a fun listen. I will say this: for the past year, I've started listening to some other podcasts more than I did in the past. And it's very easy to lose interest in a podcast, even if you
Yep.
like the topic, because just the way it's being discussed is just boring. So
Right.
I
Right.
really
Right.
try and, when it ends, at least say, okay, would I want to have listened to that?
Yep.
And I'd say more times than not, luckily, I'm kind of happy with the end result. So that's been the biggest progression for me over the year.
Fantastic. Now, to that point, Mike, my understanding is we've had some very good feedback, from Adeptus On-Air. And I think one of the reasons that I've been told is that it's not an interview, it's a conversation. And I think people
Mhm.
want to hear, they're a fly in the wall, they're just overhearing something that they feel is both, adds value to them in terms of their education, but is also entertaining. So Evan, thoughts, ideas as we reflect back on the year, maybe some highlights from your experience on Adeptus On-Air?
Yeah, I will certainly echo a lot of what Mike and James has said about the experience being unique and one that's very rewarding because we're really starting to have conversations and humanize that experience that people have. And the one thing that I reflected on kind of interestingly enough is the podcasts that I listened to that were not my own, how much it brought me back to my own experience. And I'd say in my youth, but I guess that's not exactly the case. And the first one that the Mike was referencing with Cody, it brought me back to college because I remember when reality TV was starting, I was still in college, and there were two
Yeah.
guys that I knew that went off to go do road rules.
Mhm.
And they came back on campus after the semester, and they were these massive celebrities. Now,
Yeah.
mind you, this is back in the late 90s. There was no social media. We didn't
Yep.
have this expansive proliferation of how to spread information and content as quickly as we do. And yet the reality of what happened back in the late 90s and even now is exactly the same. Like it gives people a chance to put themselves out there, express themselves, and tell their unique story. And that's what I got out of a lot of the podcasts that we did this year is, to James's point, everyone has a unique path. And whether
Yeah.
it's really a professional conversation to talk about lessons learned in business, the only way that really relates to anyone is to humanize and to have the story of
Right.
why they got there and how they got there and the struggles they went through. And not everyone has the same exact story, but they're all relatable. And to me, that's been the most interesting part of these conversations is whether you're a fencing coach and training for the Olympics, or you're a sales executive who's led teams, or
Yep.
a director. Everyone has their unique path, and the one for me that kind of stuck out recently was actually the last podcast I recorded with an artist, Kate Denton, and just understanding her journey and some of the dynamics that people take throughout their career. She's an artist and she was looking to perform and went through all these amazing opportunities to learn music and to learn the business of music, and then realized music's a really hard business to be successful
Yeah.
in. And so she went back to a corporate setting. And in that
Mm-hmm.
corporate setting, she realized that wasn't right for her either.
Mhm.
And then came back to music and maybe a little bit more experienced in professional dynamics and now can apply that to her real interest, her love, her passion, which is music and being an artist and putting that out there and showing all those different things. So that storytelling to me, I think, is what Adeptus On Air is really all about. The little tidbits of technical knowledge you get
Yep.
are great, but it's really the story that matters.
So I think that's excellent point, Evan. And picking up on that, so I've had my own podcast for several years, and before launching, I spoke to some of the top people in this space, and here's the marching orders that I got: is that at the end of the day, the listener has to trust you. They're not going to take heed or embrace what you're saying if they don't trust you. How do they trust you? You got to be authentic. Being authentic means there has to be a little bit of vulnerability because no one wants to look at a person who's perfect. I mean, the only person that I know that's perfect is me, as you know, Evan. So they want to see the authentic. So maybe going back to you, James, how do you think just speaking to our audience, being authentic, being yourself, so that you can cultivate that trust without being contrived? And you're a good person to speak to because your years behind a microphone are many.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Appreciate those kind words. Yeah, I mean, I think it just shows, and you can feel it, and
Yeah,
I'm just one of those people that I always feel like if I'm comfortable looking at myself in the mirror, that will just show, that will exude. So when I get on the podcast, and in some of these cases, I'd say maybe half of the podcasts that I did not know the guests until I got on, to discuss with them. Now, some were contacts, some might have been clients, etc. But sometimes I'm speaking to them for the first time, so you have to be 100% yourself, even just
sure.
to have the guests, be comfortable with who you are, as the host, and relax. And Anthony, something that this we were speaking of evolution a little earlier, that kind of helped me, is when I first did my first two podcasts or so. I was sort of looking to as the host to steer the conversation, to drive the bus, so to speak. And I eventually learned to kind of let that go, and let the guests steer the conversation, and drive. I would still do my prep, to get to know the guests before I got on, so I would know their background, and
Yeah,
I know what I'm speaking of. But as time went on, I got more comfortable of just letting the conversation go in whatever direction the guest wants it to go. And when that happens, I think the guest is more relaxed, the guest is more comfortable, the guest feels more in control. And I think those are
yeah,
when you have the best podcast in terms of them telling their story, because it's not really about me, it's not really about Evan, or,
right.
or Michael, or you, Anthony, as the host.
Yep,
It's more about the guests that we have on for that particular podcast. And so that kind of helped, kind of really in my evolution as far as the hosting, over the past years. I started to just kind of let the guest drive where the conversation goes, as opposed to being, as opposed to being, more so kind of steering where everything
yep.
goes.
See, I totally
Excellent.
disagree with you. I think the podcast is totally about me. And I just think the
You
guest
see,
is
there's
kind of there
always
along
one
for the ride.
narcissistic
Yeah.
megalomaniac on
So
every show.
just wanted to chime in there. Sorry to talk out of turn.
Now, I will say, just to segue to Mike, talking about authenticity, and I'll say this with complete sincerity, Mike. You come across very atypical of a CPA, very genuine, very matter of fact, and I think that you've been a terrific success behind a microphone.
No, I appreciate it. You have to kind of what everyone else is saying. I know we keep kind of piggybacking off each other, which is great that we're all kind of thinking about this the same way. You got to be able to poke fun at yourself. And I think that
100%.
when you're talking about being authentic and building people's trust, you made a comment before, obviously, hopefully kidding that you're perfect, because really, hopefully kidding. But,
Very,
we
very
have
much
to
kidding.
go into these things being able to laugh with the person, but just as importantly, laugh at yourself and show your weaknesses and show your lack of knowledge, in
Yep,
certain areas. I mean, I had two prominent authors that are both clients of the firm. They're not my clients. I'm not a reader,
yep,
but these are names like when I posted the podcast, like friends reach out to me, oh my God, I can't believe you spoke to, Ann Paget. Or when the
yep,
one with the KT Camilla spoke, my wife's a school principal, and all the teachers like, oh my God, we just finished reading her book in school. And
yeah.
I had no problem telling these people, I've never read any of your books. I've never heard of you, and that's okay. You do your research so you can conduct a good interview or a conversation, but
Mm-hmm.
you establish your weaknesses. And I think the last podcast, or one of the last two I did, I'm actually quoting lyrics from High School Musical. Now, most 51-year-old men would be embarrassed to do that, but that's what the conversation went. So, okay, let's have some
Right.
fun with it. I got kids who watch the movies. I've watched it with them. Hey, let's go. And as James said, that wasn't my plan to have the conversation and to, discussing and
Yep.
comparing the three movies and which one they like better. But that's kind of where it went. She brought up Disney. I said, okay, let's have some fun.
Brilliant. Ev, your thoughts on just being real, being authentic, and you know, I think it's part of the culture of Adeptus, and certainly knowing you for many years, I think you are one of the most consistent. You are the Evan that we know and see is the Evan that I think the listener gets to know and see.
Yeah, it's interesting because everyone has different layers, and I think Mike has always been consistent and very open and fluid and nuanced in that, and probably a little more humor embedded in his day-to-day than I have ever been. I've always been someone that takes a little bit of time to open up. It's just my
Yeah.
nature. My nature is I'm very
Sure.
introverted and very shy and
Yep.
reserved. It serves very different purposes. You can call it a strength,
Yep.
you can call it a weakness. I think it's
Mhm.
absolutely both. And it's
Yeah.
interesting to use these platforms to test things out for yourself. Allow yourself to be vulnerable and be a little bit more humorous in a conversation, or try and express something that you've never shared about your own personal journey. And I've done that on podcasts, on the ones that we've had for Adeptus On-Air, and it's uncomfortable. And that's
Yeah.
that vulnerability is sharing something that can be relatable because it is uncomfortable. And we can talk about the best Disney movies that we love, and that's the great part. And it's also, what about the Disney movies that caused us fear and nightmares when we were a kid too? Those are all real things that we can relate to. And for me, using the podcast channel, it's not dissimilar from being a moderator on a panel where you really
Yep.
have to be engaged and listen. And that's the hardest thing for people to do. And it's the one thing I've always been able to do throughout my life, is really
Yep.
just sit back and not say a lot and actually listen. This is a chance, and I don't have your gift, Antony, which is being able to talk in any environment at any time. And that really is a gift, because you can make conversation flow very naturally.
Right.
That's not my nature. So this format forces me out of my comfort zone. And I think that's
Yep.
what makes it authentic. And to Mike's point, even what James is saying, that vulnerability is really where the good conversations come from. You can
Yep.
get real depth in that, because you're not just superficially talking about the checklist of things you want to hit on this interview.
Right.
Anyone can do that, and you're better off doing that in a written Q&A.
Yep.
And I think, to me, that's been the most revealing part of this process, is early on speaking with people that I've known, colleagues, relationships I've had in the industry, to what James is saying now. Most of the guests that I've been having conversations with, I've never met in my life. I've never known their work. I haven't had the good fortune of interviewing a famous writer.
Yep.
But it's really interesting to have these moments where you're thrown into conversation with someone that you've never met before. You don't really know their background, but very
Yep.
quickly you have to relate to them. And that's what I think is so exciting about challenging myself, and I think ourselves as hosts, to be better listeners and engaged in a conversation,
Yep.
and trying to make that an interesting conversation for a listener is what becomes fun. And it's all those things. It's vulnerability, it's levity, it's all these different aspects that make an engaging conversation.
Brilliant. I also used to be an introvert, so I'm starting to come out of my shell. I don't know if that comes out, Evan. So what I'd like to do is go around again, and maybe respond to the following. If a genie came out of the bottle, James, and
Okay.
any wish for 2024 in terms of the in terms of Adeptus On-Air, it might be an idea, it might be a guest, something. If you could make, if you could make a wish come true, something that will make your episode, our show, spectacular, what would that be? And hopefully we can make that happen.
Wow, I think we're executing pretty well. So I don't know if there's any execution or technical wish
Yep.
there. More so audience. I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, we're all trying to, get
Yep.
as big a audience, as we can. We want as big an audience to learn from our guests, to hear our messaging, to get the Adeptus CPA name out there.
Yep.
That's part of it as well. So yeah, I would say if there's one, hope, wish for 2024 is to, have the listeners that we have to continue, but also many, many new
Cool.
listeners to join and listen to the podcast as well, and learn that, we're not just a CPA firm. Yes, our career kind of consists of crunching numbers and doing accounting and taxes, but we're also humans, and we have clients that are humans as well, and guests on our podcast that are humans as well, and that have stories to tell. So yeah, I mean, we know, the four of us know that these podcasts are quality podcasts, but we want
Yep.
to continue to grow our audience and have more and more people realize that as well.
Excellent. Your thoughts, Mike? Genie comes out of a
I think we need
bottle.
some merch.
Oh, now we're
Yeah,
talking.
I think some Adeptus On-Air merch, maybe like, with our four faces or something, like cartoon faces of us kind of. 'Cause I
And
think
now
that
this
would
is it.
sell. I think that would sell really well.
What about Antony Gordon is the man with a logo?
Well, I already have a hat that says that because you
That's true.
bought me one. But all kidding aside with that, I think the viewership's the key. I think James kind of stole my thunder on that. Obviously, if this is going to continue, we want obviously our listeners to kind of keep listening, and hopefully they are.
Sure.
But also, I'd love to obviously increase the traffic, which takes time. I know our marketing department's working very
Yep.
hard on that. I think obviously as we can continue to get guests that are exciting, but I think also as we can bring in some guests that have some kind of already a following.
Yep.
I think that's where it gets some traffic. I think if you look at some of the podcasts that have the most traffic, those are the people that are at least their name might be known in
Yep.
the real world, not just necessarily in the business world. And those seem to be
Yep.
getting a little more traffic. And a lot of the guests are very receptive to tagging the podcast or the link to the show. And I think at that point, that's when you see these little spikes, and hopefully
Sure.
those people listen to it and say, hey, that was a fun listen. And then they subscribe to the channel and so forth. So their message pops up that a new podcast is out, and like, oh, I enjoyed the last one. Let me check it out. I think that's really important.
Terrific. Ev, the
I
genie
have a
question.
wish list item, and I think it's coming from a little bit of the same. It's for a different reason. So my wish list item, and I've shared with a lot of the partners at the firm, an interest in trying to find a connection to Aaron Rodgers. And the reason for that is he's been a very vocal supporter of a lot of areas of interest for me, which is around mental health and well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What's interesting about the conversations we've had is these are a lot of people that have had really interesting careers, really great success in a lot of ways, and some of them very notable success. And then there are these very prominent figures that are role models to a lot of people, at all
Yep.
ages. And Aaron's obviously at the twilight of his career on a big stage in New York and had a terrible injury this season. And one of those things that he's talking about now and that is relatable, and we've met a few other folks recently as well that have had these career-ending injuries. You don't
Yep.
necessarily get that in a professional setting. You don't sprain your ankle or tore your Achilles in the boardroom, and therefore you're out of work. But in a professional sports league, that could be a career-ending injury, and you have this crisis of identity and who are you if you're not
Yep.
this person that everyone's seen you to be for for all of your life, and it's this high-performing athlete, or in the boardroom, a high-performing executive. But with Aaron and his story around what he's doing around mental health and tools he's
Yep.
using for that, it's been really interesting for me. And so I'd like to find ways to get people who have the platform and are speaking about topics that are very relevant to all of our lives, and certainly the way that we're engaged in society now, and the turmoil and the issues that we're
Sure.
seeing in our society, and some of the dysfunction. I really believe our guests on this show can help us bridge that gap by the things they're struggling with or they're working through as well. And we've seen that with a lot of our podcast guests already. And Adeptus On Air is really meant to do that. We
Yep.
talk about very often, we care about our clients because we care about them as humans, not because we care about necessarily the business they have or how successful their business is. We want to make them as successful as we can be.
Yep.
We care about them as people first. And someone like Aaron, who's been out on a very public platform talking about
Yep.
the work he's doing for himself as a person, self-love, self-care, healing,
Yep.
those are things that I think we need to talk about more in a professional setting,
Totally
because
agree.
it's hard. There's a lot of stress on us throughout the year, especially in accounting at busy seasons and tax season and year end. I mean, these are things that are really difficult, and we bring in holiday time and family dynamics, and it's a lot of layers of things that we need to peel back and recognize. There are things that are not easy on the journey, but that's what makes it so interesting and so fun and rewarding, is that we can overcome these challenges. And yeah, if we can get Aaron, Antony, you can pull that card.
Yeah, I
I
think
think
we
you'd be
can.
a great guest to have on the show.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously you recall Aaron and I were both drafted together to the Green Bay Packers, and so
I remember it, and again,
remember
that
that.
Achilles tear for you was that career-ending tear
That's
early
exactly.
on, and it was unfortunate. So
I'll tell you a quick story before we wrap up and the curtain comes down here. So when I went back to Harvard Business School to do one of the executive programs, and I sat next to Kevin Love. Really got to know Kevin very well. He has a NBA All-Star, played with LeBron. And I told him, I said, Kevin, I think that one of the best achievements you've ever done is not on the court. Is a person who had an anxiety attack on an NBA court. His PR folks said, Kevin, what are you doing? You're an all-star, good-looking guy. Why show your warts and vulnerability to the world? And he said, I'm going to be true to myself. And he really has become the voice of a lot to do with mental health in the NBA. And because he has, a platform, and I think it's about the authenticity and it's about being real. And he completely and utterly showed his PR people that what people want is real, and I think that brings this whole thing full circle. So before we wrap up the year ahead, James, on a personal level, something that you want to achieve before the curtain comes down in 2024 that you're comfortable sharing with our listeners would be, I think, a nice way to personalize this and sort of wrap up this episode.
Yeah, Anthony, a personal thing in terms of business, not podcast related.
Yeah, not podcast related.
Yeah,
and it can be personal or business.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little business thing that we're working on without saying too much, but we have a signing bonus strategy that is has the potential to be really prolific in terms of saving athletes money. The problem is one, there isn't that much proof of concept. I don't know if we're the first people doing it, but there aren't many people doing it. And so there's a bit of convincing that has to be had with the athletes. So my goal going into 2024 is to really do a great job of convincing, I guess, that this is a smart thing to do, a way to go. It's really a no-brainer in my mind what we're doing. Not to get too much into the details, but I think some of the struggles that I'm having in the early stages is convincing the first group. And so I'm taking the approach that the first 10 are going to be the hardest 10. The next 10 are going to be easier than the first 10, and the next 10 are going to be easier than the second 10, et cetera. So I'm really working hard to get that first 10 in. And we're making good progress there. I think we're at about 6 or 7 right now. And then once the results come in on that first 10, then I think the ball's really going to be rolling. So a little inside baseball there.
Beautiful.
Something that I'm working on.
Mike, some personal. I think you mentioned to me at that office party, you have now 250 million people following you on Instagram. So maybe one of the goals to hit it up to 300
million. My goal is 251 million this year. So fingers crossed, I'm sure once they listen to this, that number is going to skyrocket or perhaps go down dramatically. I'm not sure which way it's going to go. Nothing crazy. Part of my function here is to manage, our tax and bookkeeping group, which is somewhere in the 50-person range, and we continually strive to find ways to keep our staff and our managers challenged, engaged, but wanting to come to work every day. And we try and come up with different ways to do that in terms of scheduling, hybrid, other kind of things we could do. So that's something I want to definitely continue to do because, we work hard, we come up with a great product, and that people outside see that. But internally, for me, as rewarding as it is to see a satisfied client, also enjoy seeing, staff here happy, enjoying work. And you mentioned the holiday party last week, as we're getting bigger with people over the country, I manage people that, sometimes I only talk to through screens like this. So it's nice to see people in person. And, when some of them come up and say, it's really been a pleasure, working for you, I feel like I get more time with you and you're 1,200 miles away than I got from my old boss who was down the hall. So, we really try and engage people. And as we get bigger, technology's really been a huge plus for me, being able to have FaceTime with people that it's impossible to, walk down the hall. And, so I want to continue to do that. Personally, a lot of my life, obviously revolves around the kids, so, my older one will be completing her master's this year. So I want to make sure she, secures that first job, when she's done in May. And so that'll be an exciting one. And then my younger one's in college, in a major right now, just deciding if that's where she wants to continue to be or if she wants to, move elsewhere. So, a lot of the family focus will be on getting, one situated to begin her career and getting the other one more solidified, on her career path.
Fantastic. We can offer your oldest kid a job at Adeptus On-Air, Mike, at $3 an hour.
Well, yeah,
If she,
I will tell you this. I have two kids that blatantly have said for the last 10, 12 years that they will go nowhere near the accounting space. I have totally scared them away from it. They're both so far away from that in terms of their studies and their areas of interest. And as my youngest one used to always say to me, as recently as last year, tax season is so bad for me. Not for me, for her. So, when it's tax season again, she goes, "Oh no, here we go again." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, I'm the one doing all the work. You're just the one that sees me a little less." So I've definitely scared them away, for sure.
Ev, ideas, dreams, aspirations, 2024.
Yeah, I've had the most time to think about this question and still don't have a really good answer, I don't believe. But what has been interesting for me this past year is, again, this journey, this experience, this ability to develop something new for myself and for the firm, which has been really an incredible process. And 2024 to me looks much the same, in a slightly different way. So what we're trying to do with our emerging markets practice is take these different categories of interest, these areas of conversation that are happening out in the public domain, new business sectors, specifically around psychedelics and entheogenics and cannabis and different areas such as that, where these are new business opportunities that are emerging. But I think more importantly, they're talking about new social issues that can be addressed. And I go back to mental health and well-being a lot because that's where this practice is really focused on. And, the business side of it is what it is. We can do tax work, we can do accounting work and bookkeeping. But the reason these companies exist, for the most part, is to help others. So for me, what 2024 looks like, and I hope it is this exploration, this further exploration of how can we integrate this more, not only into what we do at the firm and for our clients and have these conversations that may open up new opportunities for them. It's also getting out from behind the screen. One thing we did recently down in Miami at a conference was go out there and actually talk about these topics and these intersections of interesting topics. And it was, in this case, sports and psychedelics, two things that are, sports being, core to culture in a lot of ways, looking at athletics, and this is for civilizations. This is not just an American thing. If you look at Olympics and things of sport in that way, and these new tools of exploring health and healing that we've had for thousands of years in indigenous ways, but not in Western ways. And sort of seeing these things come together is really interesting. And so getting out from behind the screen, I know for Mike, it's nice to have that because we can work with colleagues that we will never see because they're working out of Louisiana and I'm here in LA and I won't see them. I'd rather go to Louisiana this year and actually sit down with them and see them, and also capture more of this content that we are creating for Adeptus On-Air with our clients and our colleagues and just guests on the show. Do them live. It's one thing to sit behind a screen and to try and be dynamic. It's so much easier when you're in person, face to face, and capturing these moments. And whether it's hopefully at the Super Bowl with James and others, and talking about these interesting topics and getting people live on air, maybe going back to those sideline reporting days, and just getting out. That to me is what I'd like 2024 to be, is really getting back on the road, engaging with people, rebuilding relationships that for the course of the last 3 years have been put on hold or subjected to a flat screen, and trying to get back out and engage with people. So that's what I want 2024 to be. On a personal level, Mike's journey is a little bit later stage than mine. My kids are 2 and 4, so I'm seeing them getting started. And so for me, what's been really exciting is taking all of this experience that I've had and those of everyone here, and trying to engage with my children at such an early stage, and being appreciative and grateful of the time I have to watch them grow and develop. And what I realize in that is, as much as we call ourselves adults, we're still just children in older bodies. And so watching them develop is the same way that we still develop as adults. It takes a lot of time to get somewhere. And patience is something that I've had for a long time, but in the past couple of years, I've had less of it, probably because of the isolation. And I want to get back to that, and so working with my children and being with them and spending time with them has given me more back in terms of time and patience and learning and the understanding of the things that I always loved growing up and I still love doing, whether it's building something with my hands or having a conversation with a client and working with them through strategy. That's 2024.
Yeah, beautiful. So just to
Yeah.
to end our end of the year chat, just some thank yous. I want to thank firstly Michelle Smith, who doesn't get the credit she deserves behind the scenes for being our producer and a lot of the tech input. To thank our listeners for all the support. And with this crazy idea that I thought of a way back of Adeptus On-Air, it's exceeded all expectations. It's been a terrific opportunity to get closer to my three beloved colleagues on the show, James, Mike, and Evan, and really wishing only good things for 2024 to continue to grow, hit that 250 million listeners that we probably should hit by February, and only good things to each and every one of you for the new year. And we look forward to seeing you on the other side.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus On Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. If you have a question related to this episode or have a request for what you would like to hear, please email us at marketing@adeptuscpas.com. You can also find us at adeptuscpas.com online or follow us at Adeptus on social media. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.